we can get started. Yeah. All right. So, one of the largest growing concerns in rural communities have always been about, the lack of postpartum support for women and parents, right? So, and support means different things to every parent. So it could be anything from finding a genuine support system where you feel represented and safe, having a
Mhm.
safe space. It could be due to a lack of infrastructure where there aren't any programs available, which in essence means there was a lack of funding to implement those programs. Mental health, one of the biggest things as part of postpartum support. Pelvic floor therapy, which is something that's often not spoken about. Support for mompreneurs, self-care. What does that even mean for moms, right? And that's just a few concerns when it comes to postpartum support. And there have been many gaps in rural communities. It's not something new. However, it was certainly amplified since the pandemic happened with the isolation and that concern for mental health, for that support system, which no longer existed, where in person went to online or have just been erased, I guess I should say. So I'm really, really excited for this conversation. It's so dear to my heart as a mom. So Jackie Shoemaker Holmes was really going through these concerns. I'm sure you were going through those challenges, which certainly through your postpartum journey led you to do something about it, which oftentimes doesn't happen, right? We're in this dark space. You're like, I really don't know how to cope with this, but you saw an opportunity and you created something to support other women and other moms who are going through this really tough hardship in their lives. So you're the CEO of Empower for Resilience, and I really can't wait to take a deeper dive. If you don't know Empower for Resilience, please take a look at it. I will share that information later on. But to bring folks like a synopsis of what it is, essentially you provide workshop support circles for people. You do personalized one-on-one sessions for women, and it really is a genuine, intentional, non-judgmental space, a safe space where you could provide mentorship and support and really help people recenter themselves in their lives and put themselves as priority, with oftentimes as moms doesn't happen. Right? So I will pause right there, and I'm really, really excited for this conversation. So I want to actually ask you, what is the one thing that you actually want folks to take away from our conversation? So if you were to kind of sum it up in a sentence, what will be the one thing that you'd want folks to take away from our conversation today?
Oh, I love that question. So I think what I would feel the best about is if
Yeah.
women and mothers, people who birth, walk away thinking, knowing like my experience is not only my own, right? Like I am not alone. I can find community.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like maybe a lot of other communities, but it exists. And I can find my place in there. I can speak my truth in there.
Yeah.
And I can find the support, the non judgmental, compassionate support that mothers so desperately need. So I just want other people, I think the only reason I do all of this, right, is because I want other people to know that they're really, really not alone in what is a very isolating experience of new motherhood and motherhood generally.
Yeah, no, that's a great piece, and it's really, I went through this myself. Certainly, when you're on your own, and I was a new mom, and it's really scary to be alone with your own thoughts in terms of, oh my goodness, okay, so it's just you and me, you being baby and I don't know what to do. Like, I don't, like, where are the other moms? Or, what are they going through, right? How am I going to manage as this one person who is looking after this little child? And how am I going to take care of myself? Which at that time wasn't even a thought in my mind until I realized, oh my goodness, I need a support system myself to actually help me out with what I'm going through. So thank you so much for bringing that. So I want to kind of ask you this very, I think is a very important question. And we talked about it a little bit earlier on, but can you tell us a little bit about what was your why behind the launch of this amazing venture?
Well, I think it's kind of one of those things that you fall into. I really appreciated how you sort of set up that I created something out of this really difficult time. Um, it's funny because when I reflect on it, I'm like, I created something out of like sheer desperation, right? Right? Like I created a community of women unintentionally, right? And so I did that by just speaking my own truth. And it turns out that a lot of women aren't doing that.
Yeah.
And I understand why, because I had to get over my own sort of shame and and blame and all the other things, right, that come along with postpartum depression and anxiety, right? And so I started a blog when I was still in it, right? My daughter was about 2.5 years old, and I really needed to tell my story. I was familiar with blogging from my graduate student days because I studied online dating actually for my dissertation topic.
Mm.
Um, and so I was really sort of engaged in the online new media world, as it was called. And so blogging felt like the thing that I had to do about it, right? Like I was like, I just need one other person to see this and to be like, oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
This nightmare is not, just mine, Um, and then it snowballed, right? I just didn't anticipate the amount of women who were going to say me too, me too, me too. And then that's when I created Mummy Voices on Facebook. And
Mm.
then I supported women in that capacity for a couple of years, before it sort of dawned on me like, oh, I could actually do this professionally. Um, and it took a lot of, self-talk and consideration, and support around, what I am doing is something that can be marketable, right? Um, while also balancing, right, like not taking advantage of women in difficult situations, right? But if this is how I'm spending my time, I actually can be compensated for it, right?
Yeah, no, and I love that because it's not oftentimes that you find the strength to do that. Whether it's intentional or unintentional is to, well, one, to even acknowledge that you are yourself having these concerns. It's really hard, and then number two is it's hard to also find other voices, other women who are openly talking about it, right? And for you to go out there and normalize just the conversation piece, even like just to talk about it and say, hey, this is who I am, coming out and actually openly saying it, and creating this safe space for other women to relate to and to recognize and say, you know what, this is amazing. Like, I'm not the only one. And that's kind of the hardest thing to do, is to recognize that you're not the only one going through it, and to kind of go and seek help, as well. So I'm very curious to hear. I mean, since the launch of your, I guess I want to say, support system, what are some of the things that you've heard from the communities, even prior to launching it, right? Because this didn't exist before. So what were folks essentially doing as far as postpartum support, and what have you heard from your community, when it comes to postpartum support, and what was missing, and where things should have been, or where things need to be?
I think it might be easiest for me to talk about that in terms of my own experience, which has
Yeah,
been
absolutely.
reflected by the women who are involved in my community, right? That immediately postpartum supports were there, but for things that skirted or negated mental health.
Yeah.
Um, I always reflect on sort of the irony of how I had a midwife, right? Because I was like, I want to be in control of this process. I want to, I don't want it to be medicalized. I don't want all this kind of stuff. I'm going to have my baby in my living room in a bathtub,
Yeah.
and and it just wasn't the experience that I had hoped for, right? Because I had never done it before. And so we just don't know, and it's not talked about and all that kind of thing, right? So, the I had great support, but the supports that I had were around breastfeeding, and around, making sure that the baby was fed. And, I quickly became secondary, in the sort of therapeutic relationship or whatever. And then once I recognized what was going on for me, it was about 6.5 weeks in. And I recognized that through a former counselor that I had in another province, because no one was I felt like no one was really listening to me when I was saying, like, my anxiety feels like really bad. Like, it feels like um, anxiety that I haven't had in about 10 years. And I don't know why that wasn't picked up on, right? Like, I can't even speculate. Um, but then once I got into sort of the system of help, that was really judgmental. It was really unhelpful, right? Sitting across from a psychologist telling me that children bring happiness to a home. And I'm just like, okay, great. Yeah. That, like, I'm super happy for you. Um, I'm clinically depressed.
Yeah,
I don't know
that's
what,
great. Yeah,
yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah,
And so I felt like everywhere I turned, it was like, we can't help you. We don't know how. Um, I remember even the health unit, being involved with the health unit, and kind of being like, could you please help me? Like, I'm really struggling here. And it was like, well, you tick all of the like socioeconomic boxes, you tick, support system boxes in terms of having family nearby, you
yeah,
tick, these kinds of, like, we're not concerned about you. And I'm like, I'm concerned about me. you know, like, so it was really frustrating to not be able to get any of the help uh, that I needed and was asking for and actively looking for.
yeah. No, and I think that's such a great point to bring up, because when we're preparing for parenthood or motherhood, there's always focus on the preparation on the birth, or on, baby's arrival, what happens after, all those things. But there's still this hesitation to kind of talk about the importance of taking care of ourselves,
Mhm.
and when to seek help, or what are the signs, right?
Yes. Yes.
What does that support system look like? Who can you reach out to talk about these things? And that conversation rarely happens unless you're really pushing that conversation. It doesn't happen with OBs, or it's just now happening with midwives. I found with my second one, where I was asked, it's like, so okay, so who's supporting you? They're like, okay, so what do you mean by support? Do you mean like someone coming and helping me with the baby? And she goes, no, like, who's gonna help you with what you're going through as a person? It's like, oh my goodness, I have never been asked this before. It's such a new thing, and it's sad to see, because if we're not asked, it's this hesitation of, am I a bad mom to say that
Mhm.
I I can't right now? Like, I need to focus on me because I want to prioritize myself right now. Is that a horrible thing to ask? You know? Um,
It's such an important point. I just want to say it's
yeah,
really around the personalization of motherhood, right? When we were talking about, only thinking it was our experience, right? Like, when you're in a situation where you don't feel like you're supposed to feel after giving birth, right? You take that on, right? It's like, I am a defective human, instead of like, this happens to lots of women and we should be talking about it really openly, instead of personalizing it to each
yeah,
individual woman,
yeah,
and putting it on her in
yeah,
terms of like, you're the problem, instead of, this is
yeah.
a really common thing that
Yeah.
happens for
You want to
women,
go back to
but
work after
strangely we're
that?
not talking about it at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this really reminds me of when I was on mat leave and I was judged for going back to work after X amount of months and saying, what do you mean? You don't want to stay with your baby and have that time with her? It's like, no, I mean, I love her, but it's time for me to go back to work. But then you're like, oh, I'm being judged right now for what I need for myself, right? So, and oftentimes it's really rare to hear of the risks of not seeking help or to not recognizing that someone around you needs help, right? So what are the risks? And it's really amazing that in your community that this support system exists, but it's not the case in a lot of rural communities where it's still lacking that infrastructure or that funding or even that, let's say, mommy and baby group, whatever that might be for that person who needs it the most. So what do you feel are the risks for not having the necessary postpartum support system in place in rural communities?
Yeah, I don't mean to be like sort of over the top, but I think death is really what we're looking at here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if people aren't supported and they go farther and farther into depression,
Yeah.
right? Like, unfortunately, we know what the outcome of that is. And I think that as new mothers, we put this pressure on ourselves, right? Like, I remember being postpartum and reading about this woman who basically like walked into a lake, right? And um she was postpartum. I can't remember how old her baby was. I remember her husband talking specifically about the pressures of breastfeeding that she was under,
Mm.
and that he felt that there was a direct line to that postpartum experience and her death, right? And for me, it really resonated because I struggled with breastfeeding. I had a sense that it was the only way
Right.
I was going to do it come hell or high water. It didn't matter. My mental health didn't matter because I had this baby and I had to do everything imaginable. Um, I was not, I was not even factored in, right? It was like we have to feed this baby and we have to do it in the best possible way, you know?
Right.
And those are the messages that I was receiving externally as well, right? So my sort of internalized idea, notion about breastfeeding was being reiterated in very like scary ways, right? Like, oh my God, she's not going to be smart. She's not going to have an immunity. She's not going
Right.
to
Right.
like, right. And I remember my partner sitting across from me as I struggled to breastfeed. And he's like, you were bottle fed. Like, you're pretty smart.
Fine. You're good.
Like,
You're great.
fine.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to like the extreme, but I want to be really clear about the extreme
Yeah.
because I really don't want women to fall through the cracks. And I feel like if I hadn't kept clawing my way up, right? And with the help of, my partner, my mother, um, my partner's EAP program, where I finally found somebody to counsel me in a way that was sensitive and me focused, and oh, she's getting so big. um that I it could have gone very differently.
Yeah. And I think that's important. That's such a great point. And I think that's also a challenge too for a lot of folks in rural communities because you have an internal support system. So your family or your extended family, you have those influences as well, right? So it really dawned on me when you're talking about breastfeeding and the challenges that you were having or that you're hearing about is that some of those influences are also given to us by our family members, right? Is to say, well, you're not gonna breastfeed, you're gonna bottle feed. What do you mean you're not taking the full 12 months of maternity? Like you're going back to work? Like, what do you mean you're getting a babysitter? Like, what do you mean you have to go out? you know, or that you need help? It's also, I think it's also equally important to recognize who your influencers are within your own family members too, right? Or your friends. Um, and recognizing that, okay, when is a time for me to also step away for myself and say, you know what, it's okay to put myself first and to say, yes, I'm taking an hour for myself. I'm leaving baby with my partner, or I'm leaving baby with a friend, and I'm gonna go get a massage, or I'm going for my therapy appointment. To actually be okay with saying those things out loud and not made to feel so guilty. You know, that mom guilt is just horrible. To say, oh my gosh, like, am I a horrible human being for leaving my little one behind? She's not always attached to me. Is that horrible, right? So, but such a great point to bring up is that concern of death, right? What happens when the people are being are falling in the cracks? Women who don't have that support system in place don't feel comfortable voicing because they're so judged by voicing their own feelings and their opinions. So since we're in that topic of what are the risks, what needs to happen in those communities to really amplify support for women as it relates to fourth trimester, which oftentimes also doesn't get spoken about. We're only talking about 3 trimesters, but there's the fourth one when you're really looking after yourself and you're juggling so many things. And often there's this headspace of, I need to be strong, I need to be strong, I can't cry, I can't show my weakness. But to realize that it's equally strong to recognize that it takes a lot to actually say, I need help. It's equally strong to say that you need help. So what do you feel needs to happen in some of the rural communities that don't? So I guess even looking at it, what would happen if empowerment for resilience never existed? Right? Like, what needs to happen?
Well, women are really amazing and really resilient, especially like postpartum women. Like, I don't even know how we do it. I have no idea how we make it, but we do. And that's a testament to women. But what I want to say is, like, I have a whole sort of laundry list, and I think that part of that laundry list starts with so be aware of how you talk to a pregnant woman. Be aware of how you talk to her. Don't say stupid things. Don't neither scare her nor placate her, right? Like, allow the pregnant woman to lead if she has questions, if she has, right? Be a resource, right? So every other woman should be a resource for pregnant women and postpartum women. And when I say be a resource, I also mean be as safe a space as possible, right? So don't ask stupid things like, did you deliver vaginally? Are you going to breastfeed? When are you going back to work? Like, just don't, right? Just allow the woman to be and allow her to know that you are part of that informal support system, because you are there to listen, you are there to help, you are there to refer, you are there to hold her baby, you are there to clean her house, whatever, right? Like, just don't put your experience, bad or good, onto another woman. Just allow her to have her own experience.
I think that's such a great point to bring up as well, is to just ask that simple question: is what do you need? Like, what do you need, and not already have a mindset going in terms of, oh my goodness, the place is going to be a mess, like nothing is going to get done. I'm going to talk about my experience. Right? It's always that simple question to ask. What do you need from me today to make it a little bit easier for you? Um, and I think that's such an important thing to recognize, is to say, you know what, I'm going to genuinely be here for you, and I'm going to be non-judgmental. I'm going to be this person who's just going to listen if you just need me to listen, um, and be okay with it. But equally recognizing is that I'm going to stay away from these folks because I know that that's not going to happen, and I'm not going to get the support that I needed from these people too, right? So yeah, that's such a great point, as far as resources and what that actually means. So Wow. This has been such a great conversation, Jackie, and I think there needs to be a lot more awareness on the need for more postpartum support for women in rural communities. So thank you so much for carving out time to openly talk about your experiences and your incredible venture that you've launched to support other women who are going through these hardships as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how everything unveils, and seeing what your journey looks like down the road. And I'm so excited to hear more stories about other women and what and how they've overcome some of the hardships that they faced as well. So thank you so much for this chat, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else happens after this.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for shining a light on this. It is so important. And let's keep talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep talking. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you.